Thank you, Terefe and Efiom for the wonderful platform. And of course, to my colleagues, the coordinators of EOTech DevNet, Erin and the team. Thank you so much for the platform, for the opportunity. And thank you, Irina, for inviting us to present on the South African Maturity Index Assessment. I did not prepare a presentation, but at best what I can do is I can share the actual assessment itself because I have it open here. And, Irina, I want to just borrow on the words that you've said, that it's not a comparison. It is so tempting. It is so tempting to compare, for example, to compare the maturity card. Nigeria is at 74%, South Africa is at 72%. And you know how tempting it is to compare and say, hey, Nigeria is doing better than us. We need to pull up our socks. I had the privilege to actually, at the AfriGeo Symposium, sit in on a presentation that the Director General of Nigerian Space Agency shared with the AfriGeo community, which is the geo community in the continent of Africa. It was held in Nairobi, Kenya, in August, very recently. And when Dr. Idris Jega was presenting, I could see now that I'm going through it for the second time, and it makes a whole lot of sense. And so what I want to just share is, for us as the space agency, and equally, I got the same sentiment from the Department of Science and Innovation, which is the shareholder of the South African National Space Agency. It's a wake-up call for us. It woke us up to a systematic assessment. So I'm starting with the key takeaways because that is very, very crucial, particularly from a capacity building perspective, to note that national coordination mechanism informed by a dipstick that tells us how much oil we have in the engine and how much fuel we have in the tank helps us to make those decisions based on evidence that we can support. So in terms of our performance, the 72%, where South Africa is very strong, and you will be aware that we are a nation in transition. These results come 30 years into our democracy, where we are reflecting on the democratic dispensation. And after we've decided to motivate the South African space program on socio-economic and environmental basis, we need this kind of feedback to be able to see the progress that we have made since 1994, particularly the progress that we have made since we have created a space agency to become the national coordinator of all space activities in South Africa. So where our strengths lie as a nation is in the three portions of the space value chain. The infrastructural aspects, particularly of the upstream part of the space value chain, we are doing very well there. We have, according to the assessment, we have 11 satellites that our industry, and that includes academic institutions, that includes government as well as private sector companies. We have 11 satellites that we have launched into outer space. The official number, if you go to the South African National Space Council, it's 8 objects registered, but that's only because it didn't list some of them, like small part of CubeSat constellations that were not part of the South African object in outer space, but they were part of QB50 missions globally. So that's where we are doing very well. We inherited a very strong upstream sector, largely in the Western Cape province, where the first satellite was built by University of Stellenbosch. So there is also this balance between the upstream, the midstream part of the space value chain, which is where the satellite ground station environment is, where we receive data from these satellites and we participate with in many global missions through our very advanced satellite ground station infrastructure. And so I would just want to highlight some of the key takeaways from the infrastructure component. So 11 satellites have been operated by the country. They were developed by academic institutions, commercial sector, and government, civil entities. And so they are listed in the report from the first one, which made us an African spacefaring nation. That SANSA one in 1999, February 1999. And of course, the assessment also lists the fact that South Africa is home to major astronomical projects like the Meerkat, and we are building the square kilometer array. And of course, the space agency itself, it's the major driver and national coordinator of all of these activities. From the midstream perspective, South Africa takes part in about 33 third-party missions, amongst which the most familiar Landsat missions, the French satellite Sport, the China-Brazil Earth Resources satellite, and many others commercially available through largely the Secure Watch platform. So SANSA is making this data from spaceborne instruments available to South African population, although our ground station receives data over almost the entire Southern African development community, from 5 degrees south of the equator, from Bujumbura, Burundi, basically coming all the way down to South Africa as the most southern part of Africa. We do have complementary in situ component, of course, through hydrometeorological monitoring networks, the South African Environmental Observation Network, gathering data that informs ecosystems dynamics and climate adaptation strategies. And of course, our weather services, South African Weather Services, automatic weather stations, as well as SASCAL WeatherNet. These are in situ complementary data gathering instruments that we have. And so initiatives like, for example, the Advanced Fire Information System that is now used in the continent of Africa, developed in the CSIR, that helps detect fires that are picked up by satellites orbiting around the Earth. Those are some of the key infrastructural investments that have been made over time. And so just in wrapping up, I would just like to say that this whole chapter of space science and technology as a priority research area, it started when the government departments came together. We convened them under the Department of Science and Technology, which today is known as the Department of Science and Innovation. And we asked them, what would you like from a space program? And they identified their needs, which were classified under 3 broad categories: environment, security, economic growth, and innovation. Those are the 3 main. And so this study, what it does for us, it helps us to reflect and review how far we are, especially as we are celebrating 30 years as a spacefaring nation, and also especially as we are celebrating 25 years as an African spacefaring nation, to say, what has that meant for South Africa? Where are our gaps? We have universities that offer degree from undergraduate all the way to postdoctoral studies in Earth observation. And they are listed, those universities, in the study itself. And that also is an important input for the other universities that maybe were not taking space technology, Earth observation seriously, to now say, what has it meant for those that became pioneers like Stellenbosch University and University of Limpopo in the rural areas of Limpopo, so our most northern province. So in a nutshell, I would just like to say, from a capacity building point of view, I found this study very, very insightful because it is a wake-up call. As Irina has said, the assessment had not been systematically done, and therefore we were bound to think that we are where we are not. Uh, in borrowing the words of Dr. Matthew Adipoju, the Director General of the Nigerian Space Agency in Nairobi, it is extremely important that this study's results are shared across the board and that deeper assessments are done at a national level to get the participation, because I know that one of the reasons we were a bit late, we came in late at the end of the assessment, Irina would agree, and so we did not have enough time to actually apply our mind and bring our knowledge to the fore, but we at least managed to assist in validating the data that had been captured to bring us to where we are. So in the spirit of the questions asked at the annual meeting of the CEO's Working Group on Capacity Building and Data Democracy, I repeat the question that was asked by Jorge from UN-USA. What is the role of the space agency in the assessment? And that is a question that we don't need an answer to, but I think through engagement, this is a question that will be answered going forward to give us an idea of what the various space agencies that are members of the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, as well as the GEO members across the world. We have 32 of them in the continent of Africa. What is our role in this assessment? And how do we use it to break the silos that exist within the various countries? So let me leave it there for now, and thank you for the platform and the opportunity to present the South African Earth Observation Maturity Index Assessment.
Thank you so much, Dan from SANSA, for nicely presenting Earth observation maturity level of South Africa, National Space Agency. Now, I invite all members, all participants to raise questions. You can raise your hands if you have questions or suggestions.
Yeah, we have one.
Okay.
Can you see? Perfect.
Yeah. Martina?
No, just
you can continue.
No, I just wanted to invite Jorge to ask the question because Jorge is the one raising his hand.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Teresa. I mean, just a follow-up from what Dan was just saying. And I would like probably to reverse the question and taking advantage that Dan is here. I see also Farrell there. I saw Charles from Kenya. How would you use it to your advantage, this EOMI? How would you use it in the space agency to actually stimulate things in the country? Would it be of use for you? Thank you.
Is the question directed at me, Jorge?
Is to you, Charles, Farrell, anyone who wants to answer.
I will simply just say, and I've already alluded to that, helping us identify the gaps, helping us identify the blind spots, helping us identify even how we communicate, because a lot of the data is gathered through the work that we put out there as a nation through various platforms. So how we communicate, of course, gap and identification is the most important for me. It is to say, how do we get closer and closer and closer, especially in those areas where we are doing very badly, the platforms where the data is made available openly, accessible with data policies clearly articulated. So for me, gap identification and being able to say, this is where we are, not from a one pillar perspective, from a multi-pillar perspective. Thank you so much.
So if I can go next, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are. And thanks, Dan and Liz from NASRA, who have walked us through the process. And so for us in Kenya, we were also part of that analysis, the EU maturity assessment. And why that was important for us is because it helps us, like Dan indicated, to understand it. So that as we plan, then we plan from an important point of information, meaning that the interventions that we implement are guided by facts on the ground. And that is partly what we're doing in this process, to doing a stock test, or what Dan indicated, using the dipstick and trying to see the level of the oil and seeing whether we need to replenish it or whether we are good. So it is very helpful. And also the other element that we should also not lose out, it also helps anyone who's getting into a market to understand where the opportunities are. So it also makes a market discoverable, which has been a missing piece.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a second
Okay.
question, Terefe. I see you have some trouble seeing the hands. So Erin, please.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask, Charles and Dan and maybe Irena, what is your advice for countries that have a comparatively smaller space agency or comparatively smaller ecosystem? How feasible is this? How feasible is this methodology to implement if you're a smaller country with a newer space program or meteorological program? Like what would you recommend to a smaller country who is interested in this but maybe is intimidated by the how broad it is?
May I start here? So I had the pleasure to be working with bigger and smaller countries, so bigger and smaller space agencies that undertook this assessment. And it is important to note here that every assessment was different and personalized, and I'm referring mostly to the results, because each space agency had the possibility to take the assessment and apply it as they wished. So without naming countries, I can tell you that there were some space agencies that undertook the assessment through one colleague within the space agency, and others just took the methodology, took the whole assessment and divided it into smaller groups and addressed each pillar or different indicators to different groups of people that gave later on the results. Of course, this would be mostly possible through bigger space agencies, and a smaller space agency would not be able to do something equivalent. But I will highlight what I said in my presentation, that this is not a tool of comparison. So there shouldn't be any smaller space agency or any kind of stakeholder that would be intimidated to take this assessment, because I think that they would not be able to answer this. And I will tell you now that we even had countries where there was no space agency to undertake the assessment. So we had to speak to the meteorological services, for example, or other kind of SMEs that, so within the private sector, that they're using Earth observation. So they undertook the assessment as well. So, of course, as said, this is not a tool of comparison, and it's also just important to realize that it's beneficial for all stakeholders to realize what is the position of the country, what's the maturity of the country. And I think it's all mostly about having the willingness to progress and having the capacity to understand that this is for the best and for the sake of the whole country. So that's within the national level and not just an activity that would just make the stakeholders feel less of importance. Hope this answers your question.
Thank you so much, Reno, for a very comprehensive answer. Mr. Ghani, you can
Yeah,
continue.
see a
Dr.
hand
Ghani.
is up.
Yeah.
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 Hello, how are you? Terrific. Thank you very much, and thank the presenters for the wonderful presentation. It's good. The assessment methodology and the way it is carried out. To me, all depends on the. If we're talking about development, I think in most cases the responses you'll be getting from the assessment will be very, very subjective. And most likely, most countries will like to prop up egos. Oh, we have this, we can do this, we can do that. That has been happening. Who is checking who? Who is really doing what? I think what is the most important is, well, I don't know, the purpose of the assessment. To me, seriously subjective, but what I should be looking at, I believe we should be looking at mainly is that of the needs, the data need, the challenges you have, and how we can recognize it. This is what you should need, this is what you should do, or this is what we're recommending that we do. There must be a way of assessing that. But at the same time, politically, I can hide what I have. I can hide what I'm able to do. It is left to me, but that may not really give us the clear picture of what is really working, what is the truth position of things in most countries. It depends on what you want to actually show or what you don't want to show or how you want to. It is really solving the human problem, solving the environmental problems that should be the key things. How do we go around this? It's not just assessing what you have. The tendency is for me not to show that I'm weak. That's just my observation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ghani, for interesting. Mr. Daniel, you can continue.
Let's take this question further. We are Africans. We are the youngest continent on the planet, endowed with young people. How do we realize the aspiration of Agenda 2063 from a youth perspective? How do we use these assessments to give us insights? When I had a conversation with Charles Mwangi in Nairobi, we discussed the question of youth as a ticking time bomb. Are we clear on what we need to do with this wonderful resource endowment of young people? That's one question. It's not a question we can address today and finish, but as space agencies, as Earth observation users in the continent, how are we getting the next generation to understand the value of Earth observation? Right from the village chief where they grow up, not in the urban centers necessarily where they are endowed with digital capabilities. Second question, how do we assess intra-Africa trade? How do we use this tool to increase it from the 16% it currently is standing at and encourage more, which is why I celebrate having attended the AfriGeo Symposium hosted by RCMRD in Kenya, where I saw fellow Africans discussing Earth observation for Africa, especially during the Africa Caucus session. So these two questions for me, they are key and very integral to the aspirations of Agenda 2063. And they are very practical mechanisms through which we can know what's happening in West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, and Southern Africa, and begin to exchange hands with one another. So that's just my contribution.
Thank you so much, Dan. Is there any more question or comments? If not, we can go forward to the next agenda.
Oh, I see another hand up.
Okay.
Monsieur Buka.
Okay, Mr. Buka, you can continue.
Yes, is everybody heard me? I don't know if my sound is very well. My microphone.
Yes.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to recall, my name is Farenzi Gu from Gabonese Spatial Agency. I'm the head of Public Policies Assessment Service. And just a little questions. Firstly, I appreciated the explanation on the case of small agencies, but just a little question, are there any key indicators without which the evaluation cannot be validated? And just also, how can we be sure that the data collected is valid? Just these questions. Thank you.
Marina, can you react?
Yes. Thank you for the question. As said in the presentation, together with the assessment, we also supported all the findings with desk research. So we added additional information that could be found online to support the findings that were collected. So, of course, especially in the case of smaller countries, there were many of the indicators that were not even having any answer, because there couldn't be any answer in the question addressed there. So for this, we made clear in the final report that was submitted to the European Commission, to DG IMPA, that for this part or for this aspect, not enough information was collected. So that was a clear component of the whole report, because it's not only the maturity cards that were generated at the end, it was a whole report of the country that had a clear analysis and clear explanation of all the different pillars and all the different indicators. And there was also an additional last part of the key takeaways with some extra comments that we had added over our observation within the country. And that was, of course, a collective overview that we had together with the stakeholders that were engaged in order to undertake the assessment.
Thank you so much, Reina.